The night is long, but we must press on.
The path ahead is our only hope.
34 names were written at dusk. At dawn, there were 35 beds. The horses were fed, their harnesses tidy, their hooves pressed into the soft earth. Coffee still steamed beside the fire, though no hand had stirred it. The camp lay still, untouched, as if the people had simply stepped away for a moment, and never returned. No footprints marked the road leading out, no tracks in the mud, no wheel ruts fading into the morning fog. Only the forest watching, unchanged. Those who would later search the area spoke of oddities that could not be explained. Tools laid in careful order, blankets folded over one another, a violin resting on a stump, strings still taut, a child's slate left open, the letters half written. And yet, every document tells a different story. The surveyor's journal lists 31 travelers. The wagon master's account names 33. Letters from children, later found, speak of people who were never recorded at all. By the time the search began, the trail itself seemed unsure whether the train had ever existed. It was as though the road had chosen to forget them, or perhaps it had never intended to remember. Today, we follow the records, the journals, the fragments left behind. We will not chase legends. We will not settle for explanations that feel too neat. By the end, you may notice something the investigators missed, something that does not appear in any log or ledger, yet has been present all along. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the Ozarks. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We'd love to see how far these hills and forests reach, across the world, to wherever you are. The Harper Bennett wagon train was never seen again, yet the camp they had made remained as though frozen in a single morning. Bowls of porridge still clinging to wooden spoons, coffee steaming faintly beside the fire pit. Oxen, harnessed in neat lines, waited patiently as though expecting a command that would never come. A fiddle lay against a wagon wheel, its strings taut, untouched, a soft hum of wind threading through them. Blankets were folded across beds, shoes aligned with careful precision. Even the small tools used to tend the wagons sat in tidy piles. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing suggested struggle. Nothing suggested haste. But there was something wrong, something that could not be ignored. The camp counted 35 beds, yet no one remained to claim them. One extra blanket lay in the center of the circle, with no owner, and every trail leading away from the site seemed to dissolve into the forest, leaving only questions where answers should have been. It was a morning like any other, yet nothing was ordinary. A frying pan balanced on a rock, a ladle still inside. Horses whinnied softly, untended, ears flicking toward the hills. A child's slate lay open on a log, letters half-formed, an unfinished lesson. It was as if the people had stepped aside for an instant, promising to return, and the road had swallowed them before the promise could be kept. Nearby, wild flowers pressed against wagon wheels, the petals flattened and damp with dew. A small creek ran beside the campsite, bending around the wagons as though avoiding them. Every item was exactly where it should be, yet something was off. The scene was orderly, but impossible. The objects told stories. Martha Quinn, the schoolteacher, had left a slate full of alphabets, the edges worn from small hands. Jonah Pike, the guide, left a compass, cracked and pointing north with strange certainty. Eli Harrow, the wagon master, left behind a leather ledger, its pages neatly filled with names, numbers, and mileage, but several entries scratched out, as if the road itself refused to be recorded. Through these traces, We learn who they were, not through direct accounts, but through what remained behind. And in those remnants, there was already a sense of unease, a quiet suggestion that the trail they had taken was not ordinary, that the forest had its own measure of time and memory. Local accounts provide fragments, hints that grow stranger with distance in time. The ferryman who lived along the Blackwater Fork refused to carry the wagon train across the river. He said simply, "The road counts you wrong." He did not elaborate, nor could he. Those who tried to press him only found his eyes fixed somewhere in the hills, and a silence that stretched longer than the river itself. By this point, the records and the camp itself already conflict. Some documents list 31 people. Some list 33. Some speak of travelers who were never recorded at all. And yet, the evidence, the camp, the wagons, the objects, the extra blanket, remains untouched still, quietly insisting even now that there was once a presence here, and that the presence is not fully gone. What happened in the night that followed is uncertain, but the traces left behind hint at a story that refuses simple explanation, a story that we will now begin to untangle, piece by piece. Before the night that swallowed the wagon train, they traveled along a narrow, uneven path through the Missouri Ozarks. The hills rose abruptly on either side, dense with oak and maple, their shadows stretching long and strange, even in the late afternoon sun. Travelers kept pace with each other, voices low, the occasional laughter of children cutting through the rhythmic creak of wagon wheels. Dust swirled around the oxen, clinging to their legs and the polished brass of their harnesses. Every tree seemed familiar, yet each bend in the road brought the sense of strangeness, like stepping into the same place twice and finding something subtly wrong. Gideon Vale, a surveyor working for the county, passed the train along the western trace 2 days before its disappearance. He wrote in his journal, 31 souls, 2 wagons stacked with provisions, children seated by age. 1 woman in grey does not answer to any name I know. He sketched the hills, noting the curves of the creek and the positions of the wagons. But his measurements are curious. Distances do not match the map exactly. 1 bend appears twice, another is missing entirely. His notes hint at something he cannot quite explain, a subtle distortion in the path. It is not just a matter of memory, he writes. The land itself behaves strangely, shifting as if it resists his counting, his recording. Martha Quinn, the school teacher, kept a small slate for the children who traveled with her. In the late afternoon, she wrote sentences, practicing letters and words. Later, when the slates were recovered, historians noticed they contained phrases that do not belong. The river learned our names. Mr. Pike argued with a man we do not have. The moon came up twice tonight. At first, these were dismissed as childish errors, scribbles made by wandering minds. Yet the handwriting is careful, each letter deliberate. Each word seems almost like a message, a record of things witnessed only by the children, or perhaps by the forest itself. Martha's slate shows no fear, only observation. But the observers themselves, the children, seem to notice the wrongness of the land before any adult does. Jonah Pike, the guide and former Union scout, offered a very different account years later. He recalled the wagons moving along the ridges, the forest pressing close on either side. He remembered distances that could not exist, paths that shortened and lengthened at will. The dogs he led would bark, not at visible threats, but at empty spaces, unseen shadows that seemed to move with purpose. Pike writes that the map itself refused to match the road, folding in ways that were impossible. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, he said, he felt as if the land had shifted beneath him, like a tide that remembered only part of the train. Across these three accounts, one fact becomes clear. The people on the train were moving through a land that did not behave predictably. Oxen struggled over roots that appeared where none should be. Water in the creek reflected the sky, but sometimes it reflected nothing, only the shapes of wagons that were not there. Children spoke of voices carried by the wind, repeating names they had not called. Meals prepared on the trail sometimes went missing, only to be found hours later in the same spot, untouched. No single observer could fully understand what they experienced. Each recorded part of the journey, but every record contradicted the others in subtle, haunting ways. As the sun sank behind the hills, shadows stretched long and strange. The wagons slowed, the oxen tired, the children quiet. Martha Quinn checked her slate one last time. Jonah Pike adjusted the compass, convinced that north had shifted beneath him. Eli Harrow, the wagon master, counted the travelers carefully. Yet when he finished, one extra bedroll remained unclaimed. The forest seemed to lean in closer. Every bird and insect went silent as if waiting, and the road ahead, winding through the Ozark hills, seemed to vanish in places, reappear in others. The travelers would not know it yet, but the night would arrive unlike any before. By its end, 34 would be written at dusk, 35 counted at dawn, and a story would remain to puzzle anyone who came looking. By the time the first light brushed the Ozark hills, the camp was empty. Not in the sense that people had simply left, but in the sense that the very act of departure left no trace. Bowls of porridge lay half-eaten, spoons resting where they had been set, coffee still steaming beside the stones of the fire pit. Oxen waited with quiet patience, tied in perfect lines, their heads lifted, ears twitching, eyes calm, as if awaiting someone who would never return. A fiddle leaned against the wheel of the lead wagon. Its strings were taut. The bow rested beside it, still polished, still in place. And yet, 34 names had been written the night before. By morning, 35 beds were counted. One extra blanket lay folded in the center, unclaimed. No one had touched it. No footprints led from the camp. No wagon tracks disappeared into the hills. Only the forest remained, still and watchful, as though it had accepted the traveler's absence without complaint, without comment, without explanation. Hunters and settlers who arrived later described a strange stillness. Even the creek seemed to curve around the camp, avoiding it. A wind rose and fell without sound. The birds did not perch on the wagons. Small animals did not stir among the wheels. One of the children's slates had been left in the dirt. On it were phrases that made no sense to anyone, but those who had been there. The wheels count us wrong. The shadows ate one of us. We are more than the tally. The oxen were still tied, their harnesses polished and clean. The fire pit contained no ash from the night before, and yet coffee had cooled in cups that were otherwise untouched. Objects arranged themselves with impossible order, as if the camp itself was keeping score of the missing travelers. And in these moments, anyone looking could sense the strangeness. Not a fear of monsters, not an unnatural creature, but a quiet misalignment of the world, of distance, of count, that unsettled the mind in a way that no words could fully convey. The night itself seems to hold the most secrets, though no one saw it. A distant farm reported hearing wagon wheels on the ridge. At first, many, as if the train continued along the trail as it always had. Then fewer wheels, the sound thinning, slower, intermittent. Then only one wheel creaked, alone, across the ridge. And finally, silence. At the same time, local woodsmen recalled hearing voices that could not be placed, children calling names that were not theirs, adults speaking to people no one could see. Dogs barked at empty space, then whimpered as if scolding someone unseen. The forest was quiet and loud at the same time, like a memory someone cannot fully recall. Tools and utensils, left in perfect alignment just hours later, had somehow been moved slightly, as though the camp remembered the travelers differently than any human record could. And now, we return to the evening before the disappearance, to the last moments anyone can be certain of. The children sit on logs near the wagons. Martha Quinn, their teacher, writes slowly on her slate, "Home, hone, none." The letters themselves seem to twist, imperfect, caught between the world of observation and the world of memory. Jonah Pike checks his compass, the needle swinging wildly. The oxen stir, sensing the approach of something that the eye cannot yet see. Eli Harrow counts the wagons and the travelers. 34, 34 again, then one extra bedroll in the center. He cannot explain it. A wind rises through the trees, carrying whispers, not of voices, but of the tally itself. The road curves strangely ahead. The forest seems to stretch and fold. Every mile traveled seems both familiar and new. The travelers feel it, though they cannot yet name it. And the night comes down, thick, complete, and inexorable. By now, we can see the pattern emerging. The records do not agree. The objects do not align with the human memory. Even the road itself, the hills, the creek, and the wind, each bears witness differently. Something happened that night, yes, but it is not a simple disappearance. It is a miscount, a misalignment, a memory that refuses to reconcile itself with reality. And as we follow the trails of evidence forward and backward, we begin to realize that the true story does not lie in what happened, but in what was recorded, observed, and forgotten. Days after the disappearance, word of the vanished wagon train reached officials and locals alike. Families whispered among themselves, recounting tales of children and adults who had never returned home. A Pinkerton agent named Charles Rook arrived to investigate, following leads left by scattered journals, slates, and surveyor notes. From the moment he entered the Ozark Hills, he sensed something that no record could convey. The forest did not seem welcoming. The creek curved and twisted, reflecting light in ways that did not match the sun's angle. The wind carried names he did not recognize, spoken in voices that seemed almost familiar. Each step brought new questions. Each bend in the road seemed different than memory or map suggested. And yet, the evidence, the wagons, the camp, the roads, persisted, stubbornly tangible and impossibly ordered. When Rook reached the abandoned site, he found objects left in impossible alignment. A wagon stood perfectly centered between two trees. Boots lined up with careful precision, untouched by dirt or dew. Tools and utensils placed in neat rows, exactly as they had been during the last count. A hymnal lay open, the pages turned to the same hymn over and over again, with every name replaced by the word U.S. The oxen, tethered and calm, looked at him without recognition, as if expecting their owners to return at any moment. He noted these details carefully, writing them in his own journal, yet he could not reconcile them with the reports he had received. 31 travelers here, 33 there, yet the camp counted 34, 35, and sometimes more. The search did not end at the camp. Rook and his team combed the surrounding hills. One wagon was found deep in a grove that no trail could reach. The wheels bore no tracks leading in or out. A child's slate rested in a patch of ferns, letters faint but legible. The road folds itself tonight. Nearby, footprints that seemed human appeared briefly in the soil, then vanished. Rocks had been moved to line the path, but the path led nowhere. The forest itself seemed to reconfigure under their gaze, making the familiar strange, the mundane, impossible. Rook interviewed locals, hoping for clarity. The ferryman along Blackwater Fork remembered the travelers' approach and refused to carry them across. He repeated his cryptic warning, "The road counts you wrong." A midwife swore she saw Martha Quinn months later, in a town over, older, calm, as if she had simply stepped into another world. Children from neighboring valleys described shadows among the trees, figures who moved but never spoke, and animals that seemed to recognize some invisible command. Each account contradicted the others. Every story added another layer to the mystery, nothing fully aligned, yet each contained fragments of truth, strange in their accuracy and their impossibility. As days stretched into weeks, Rook began to doubt the reliability of memory itself. The forest refused to conform to maps. Distances shifted. Trails led in loops that could not exist. He recorded everything meticulously. 31, 34, 35 travelers. Tools in perfect order. Animals calm yet alert. Slates with strange messages. Yet the more he recorded, the more the numbers, the evidence, and the recollections conflicted. Every piece of data added both clarity and confusion. He began to misquote his own notes, even recalling events that he had never witnessed. And slowly, the forest seemed to occupy his mind more than the wagons, more than the travelers, more than the evidence. By the time the search ended, even the most seasoned investigators felt the strangeness pressing against their reasoning. The forest kept its secrets, the objects kept their order, and the numbers refused to align. 31 travelers here, 33 there, 34 counted, 35 remembered. And yet, all remained missing. The search did not solve the disappearance. It unraveled those who sought to understand it. And as the sun dipped behind the Ozark hills once more, it left a quiet, impossible truth. Some questions cannot be counted, some journeys leave no tracks, and some roads remember differently than the people who walk them. By now, the trail has led us through objects frozen in time, through children's slates and surveyor journals, through wagons abandoned yet perfectly aligned, and through the words of those who searched and found nothing. 31 travelers here, 34 there, 35 counted, 34 beds in the morning, 35 blankets in the circle. The numbers themselves seem to mock the attempt at understanding. And so, those who would look for answers have proposed 4 possibilities, 4 ways to explain the unexplainable. But none fully satisfies the evidence. None fully reconciles the numbers or the objects, or the memory of the road. The first possibility is perhaps the simplest, though it explains very little. Some believe the travelers may have moved on of their own accord. A sudden panic, a decision to leave the path, a plan to reach another settlement unseen. Perhaps some disagreement or fear prompted them to scatter. Yet the evidence resists this notion. Wagons left aligned, tools in place, coffee cold beside a fire pit, oxen still harnessed. How could 34 people vanish, leaving everything perfectly ordered? How could they leave one extra bedroll folded in the center? The human explanation accounts for movement, but it cannot account for order, or for the numbers that do not match across the records. The second possibility invokes nature itself. Perhaps a flash flood, or a sudden sinkhole, or some other force of the Ozark hills carried the travelers away. Yet the land offers no evidence. The creek curved around the wagons without displacing them. No signs of mudslides or collapsed ridges. Animals remained calm. The forest seemed aware of the human presence, yet did not disturb it. Nature could remove bodies, perhaps, but it could not align boots, fold blankets, or leave the instruments of daily life untouched. The forest had left them absent, yet perfectly preserved. The third possibility turns to belief, to the customs and stories of the Ozark region. Some locals spoke of unnaming, a process by which the land and its paths might erase travelers who are unprepared or ill-measured by the road. The ferryman's warning, "The road counts you wrong," resonates here. Perhaps the travelers entered a place where memory and identity are fragile. Perhaps the forest itself kept score, counting some too many times, leaving others unrecorded. This explanation respects the numbers motif, the contradictions in the slates, journals, and testimonies. Yet it leans on speculation, on folklore, on the unprovable. The fourth possibility is perhaps the most disquieting, that the wagon train existed as a collection of fragmented stories, stitched together after the fact. That the traveler's journey was recorded differently by every observer, each memory shaping the evidence according to perception. 31 travelers for the surveyor, 34 in the ledger, 35 counted at the camp. The children's slates describe figures who were never on any official list. Perhaps the wagon train itself was a construct, a story agreed upon, yet unstable, slipping in numbers and alignment each time it is remembered. And if so, the disappearance was not only of people, but of certainty itself, of the ability to know fully what was real. Each possibility explains fragments and fails at others. Human action accounts for movement, but not order. Nature accounts for removal, but not preservation. Folklore gives meaning, but not evidence. Memory accounts for contradiction, but not the camp's tangible strangeness. The Ozark Road keeps its tally differently than humans do. Perhaps it always has. Perhaps it always will. And so the train vanishes, not with a scream, not with a fight, but quietly, with numbers that refuse to settle, leaving behind a story that can only be pieced together through observation, reflection, and the faint awareness that some things cannot be counted. After months of investigation, after journals, slates, ledgers, and oral accounts had been examined again and again, one pattern emerged more clearly than anything else. The numbers never matched. 31 travelers recorded by one observer, 34 by another, 35 counted at the camp itself. One extra blanket left in the center, neatly folded. A slate describing people who did not exist. A wagon appearing in a grove with no path leading to it. Each record reflected a truth, yet each contradicted every other. The forest remembered differently than the people. The objects remembered differently than the forest. Memory, evidence, and observation were each telling their own version of the same story. If we could step inside the wagons, walk the paths they walked, perhaps we would see it differently. Perhaps the travelers themselves knew the discrepancy. Perhaps they understood that the road counted them wrong. And yet they moved on, step by step, unaware that each movement, each action, would be remembered differently, miscounted, misaligned, misrecorded. Martha Quinn's slate, found years later, shows that even the children noticed. The wheels count us wrong. The shadows ate one of us. We are more than the tally. Words of a child, simple in form, yet profound. A reminder that understanding does not always come from adults, or ledgers, or maps. Sometimes it comes from observation alone, from seeing what the world does with you when you step upon it. Even the searchers, trained men like Rook, experienced it. The forest reconfigured itself under their feet. Paths shortened and lengthened. Wagons and objects appeared in different arrangements. Footprints vanished, leaving only impressions of impossibility. They began to misremember their own records. Even as they documented, they became part of the story, caught in the folds of time and perception that had already swallowed the wagon train. Each observer, whether child, teacher, surveyor, or agent, became both witness and participant, unable to separate what had happened from what the land remembered. And that, perhaps, is the essence of the story. A disappearance not of bodies, but of certainty itself. The final clue, found years later, may be the most revealing. Martha Quinn's last slate, carefully preserved, shows only a single message. Do not count us. The counting is how the road keeps us. It is a message that cannot be ignored. The road, the forest, the hills themselves do not merely witness travelers. They record them, measure them, and remember them differently than humans ever could. Perhaps it is not disappearance at all. Perhaps it is transformation into something beyond observation, a tally beyond comprehension. And as we consider this, it becomes clear that anyone who follows the road, anyone who measures it, becomes part of the story, a participant in the miscount, a witness to something that cannot fully be explained. 34 left at dusk, 35 counted at dawn, 31 recorded, 33 remembered. 1 extra bedroll remained. 1 slate held the letters of children who had seen too much. 1 road held them all in its measure. And one of them might be you, listening now, trying to reconcile what you have heard, trying to count what cannot be counted. The Ozark road is still there. It still counts. And it does not forget. If the Ozark road counts us differently, then your count matters too. Take a moment now and leave a comment. How many travelers did you keep track of? 31, 34, 35. Or did you notice the extra one hiding between the lines? Subscribe for more stories that wander through forgotten paths, abandoned towns, and roads that remember differently than we do. And if you've ever walked a trail where the world felt slightly off, share that story below. We want to know where the road has counted you wrong. Until the next story, keep your eyes on the path and listen carefully, for the road is always watching.